This week, how do we reconcile loyalty and rebellion? In an exclusive reading from the Scottish Rite Journal, from the Southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, we've got an article by three excellent authors who put together a wonderful and succinct philosophical look at this interesting paradox and what it means as and for Freemasons. Then, in another exclusive reading, we're going to read a piece from the Knight Templar magazine published for the summer of 2025, all about the Sinner's Bible. Can a couple of typos cost you everything, including and up to dying in debtor's prison? If you're Robert Barker, yes. Tune in to hear the story about the Sinner's Bible in this exclusive reading from the Knight Templar magazine. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode number 683. In the news, what's going on? Well, I did finally update my schedule on the website. More on that in just a moment. First, I want to go ahead and thank all of the supporters of the show, our contributors, fellows, producers, legacy partners, and of course, those folks out there picking up producers' pins and all of those things. I just sent out a batch of producers' pins this week, so I want to thank those folks who had been picking those up. You guys are awesome. If you're out there and you're curious on how to support Masonic education like this, head on over to our website, wcypodcast.com, click on Support the Show, and check out the various options. We utilize Patreon and PayPal, as well as we have our shop, which everything goes through PayPal there. I want to say thank you in advance for any considerations. Now, back to that presentation schedule. I'm going to be at MasonicCon, Kansas. Yes, I'm not going to present or anything. I'm going to have fun at the festive board and hang out with my good friend Alex Powers and his family and see all of you. Yes, the world famous now, MasonicCon Kansas, taking it to the next level. It's going to be awesome. I hope you guys got your tickets. They were free this year. There was also options for free streaming. There were all kinds of amazing opportunities to be able to check out this specific conference. I'm very much excited about it. Again, happening the weekend of the 19th. The festive board is on the 18th in the evening. Again, it's going to be awesome. So anyway, more information on that at MasonicConKansas.com. On the 21st, I'm hoping to be able to make it down to Homer Masonic Lodge, where I am an honorary member, to witness Steve Harrison's An Imperfect Storm, a talk that he'll be doing down there. Of course, later in the year, we've got Grand Lodge Sessions for Illinois. We've also got the weekend after that. We have an AMD All-State In-Gathering here in Illinois, which will be a lot of fun. And perhaps heading off to the SRICF National Body meeting, or I might be presenting somewhere else. We'll see. I think I might have a little bit of a conflict there. So presentations come before attendance for the schedule, so I'll keep you all abreast on what's going on. If you're interested in having some Masonic education and have me out or do a Zoom talk, head on over to our website and click on Contact and just shoot me a message. We've got a number of presentations on the website that I do there. All of them are anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour each, with Q&A included. So if you're looking for something specific, I'm more than willing to also write a new presentation. If there's something that you all are interested in, just let me know. So the articles I have for you this week were both pulled from publications that are current, and I had to reach out to them each to get their A-OK, that it was all right that I read these on the program. The first one I have actually comes from the Scottish Rite Journal, and this was something that I thought, hey, this is an incredible article. It's a question we get very often in Freemasonry. In particular, it's a question that I get oftentimes when I do my presentation called The Masonic Pub Crawl, Freemasonry in America and Its Colonial Tavern Beginnings. It always comes up. And the question is really in the title of this article called The Paradox of Loyalty and Rebellion. Now, I reached out to the managing editor, Dr. Mark Driesenstock, 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite Journal. If you'd love to read the issue, please check it out. It is the July-August 2025 issue, and of course, this is being read with the permission of the Scottish Rite Journal and the Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction. The authors of the article are three: Charles Edward Andrew Lincoln IV, 32nd degree, Andre Antonescu, 32nd degree, and Andrew Ullman, 32nd degree, all from the Valley of Washington, D.C. So, here it is, the paradox of loyalty and rebellion. Now, before I get into this, let's just say that the question often arises, how could Masons have supported a rebellion when in our charges we are asked to not partake in, or I think the verbiage is actually to promote or countenance any act which may have a tendency to subvert the good order of society or the peace, and further to pay obedience to the laws under whose country we live and to always obey the civil magistrate. So how do we reconcile those two things? And that's where the title of this particular piece caught my eye, and I said we should read that because this is pertinent, not just today, but in all times. So let's check this out, the paradox of loyalty and rebellion. To speak of rebellion in the same breath as loyalty is to court paradox. The American War of Independence was a time of great upheaval, and at its heart were men who not only shaped the nation, but also followed a set of guiding principles, many of them rooted in Freemasonry. The craft, particularly in its first degree, prescribes obedience as both civil duty and sacred command. The initiate is bound by solemn obligation to uphold the laws of the land, to respect civil authority, and to preserve peace and order, unless, crucially, these violate the higher moral law that Masonry itself presupposes. The obligation of a Mason includes loyalty to one's country. Yet many of those who gathered in Philadelphia in 1776, those whose quills inscribed the Declaration of Independence, were Masons. Not merely nominally so, but deeply committed to the craft. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, and others who took obligations in darkened lodges and later took up arms against a sovereign to whom those same oaths seemed to bind them. At first glance, it is contradiction. On deeper examination, it is something closer to alchemical resolution. The Masonic oath does not bind the soul to tyranny. Rather, it pledges the initiate to a principle of ordered liberty, a civic virtue illuminated not by the will of kings, but by the light of reason, fraternity, and moral discernment. In this way, Masonic loyalty is loyalty to justice itself, not merely to institutions that may, at times, depart from her path. When justice is perverted, the oath does not command silence. It compels the opposite. John Locke, in his second treatise of government, declared that, quote, "When the government is dissolved, the people are at liberty to provide for themselves by erecting a new legislative," end quote, to secure the ends of liberty and justice. The point for Locke, and later for the founders, was not rebellion for its own sake, but resistance when lawful authority becomes lawless. Quote, "The end of law," he continues, "is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom." This Enlightenment idea that justice and moral law supersede even sovereign commands finds esoteric expression not only in the Blue Lodge degrees, but also in the teachings of the Scottish Rite. The degree of Knight Rose-Croix, for example, emphasizes fidelity to truth over obedience to despotism. The perfect Élu degrees, particularly the 10th, 11th, and 12th, stress the necessity of moral discernment, holding rulers accountable and exalting integrity above submission. In these higher degrees, one is reminded that to stand against tyranny may not be treason. It may be initiation. Thus, the Masons, among the Founding Fathers, did not so much break their oaths as elevate them. They interpreted the sacred obligation of the first degree not as a leash to passive submission, but as a call to active justice. The Masonic principle of obedience to law assumes that law itself is just. Where it is not, the Mason must, in Locke's words, which he uses repeatedly, appeal to heaven. That is to say, to a higher tribunal of moral truth, from the second treatise of government. One is left to ponder As Albert Pike so poetically frames it in Morals and Dogma, quote, "Man has natural empire over all institutions. They are for him, according to his development, not he for them. This seems to us a very simple statement, one to which all men everywhere ought to assent." End quote. This is from the lecture to the second-degree fellowcraft. The Masonic founders did not respond to this philosophical issue with words. They responded with a republic. Well, there you have this one. This again from the July-August 2025 Scottish Rite Journal. You can check this out on the website, scottishrite.org, and click on the journal. Again, my thanks goes out to these three wonderful authors who put their thoughts and their efforts into this to really take a look at this question. And such an interesting question that probably deserves many, many pages. They were able to take it and sort of, through alchemical process, if you will, through the process of chipping away at the stone, bring us to a refined version or answer here that I think is very important. That is, that the obligation itself is to the tenant, and along the path of obeying the tenant, we sort of have these intermediaries, things like government, things like leaders and laws and all of these kinds of things. And if those waypoints sort of fail or fall off the path of that tenant, like truth or justice, it's up to the Mason to ensure that his obligation isn't broken to the actual tenant. And so in this case, these Masons saw issue and they stood for something greater, that is the actual tenant, rather than those who would have maybe perverted it. Now, once more, thank you to those authors. Great job. I'll have a link back to the article and the issue in the show notes so that you can pick up this issue, read it yourself, and really appreciate what they've done. The next piece I have is a bit of history. Now, the first time I heard about this, I believe I was watching an episode of Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates. And I can't remember if he was investigating this or something along the lines. But it also came up in the most recent Guy Ritchie jam that was on Apple TV Plus, The Fountain of Youth, which is for me, it was an enjoyable Indiana Jones meets Guy Ritchie flick. So it was pretty enjoyable for me. And of course, if you don't know what I'm talking about, at a part in the movie, they're looking for the Sinner's Bible. Yikes, what is that? Well, it just so happens that in the summer 2025 issue of Knight Templar magazine, Brother Ben Williams has written a historical piece on this thing called the Sinner's Bible. What is it, and what can we make of this? I'm going to read this piece. I got permission from Brother Ben. I'll also link back to the publication within our show notes, which has all of the images of this thing, the Sinner's Bible, or the Wicked Bible, as it is also sometimes known as. So, let's check this out. The Sinner's Bible. How a typographical error ruined Robert Barker, printer to the King of England and member of the Worshipful Company of Stationers in London. Modernly, the written word is so ubiquitous, it is easy to forget its power. But reading and writing belong to the sentient species, tantamount to magic. Nonsense forms are standardized and become sensible to codify the innately human expression, speech. It is a power like no other, the power to persuade, to enlighten, instruct, exalt, declaim, even damify. The power to create ideas which cross time and space and move continents. It is, to a T, a power of spelling. In 17th century England, this power was strictly controlled. Printing required licensure by the Worshipful Company of Stationers and Papermakers, a livery company warranted by the Crown. The stationers' grip was powerful. Without their approval or application for the right to copy or reproduce, the company could seize books and arraign offenders. The company was chief censor for the Crown and the Church of England, persecuting material deemed inappropriate for circulation to an increasingly literate population. The company exerted its monopoly over the written word quite literally, under the black letter of the law. The history of printing is well known. Johannes Gutenberg, widely credited for demonstrating the power of the press for his 42-line Bible, produced in 1455, had repurposed wine presses and employed movable type, not to print the Bible for which is known today, but to stamp out indulgences for penitent sinners. The reason was commercial. Indulgences were costly and time-consuming to produce. Each involved a form of text, reiterated typically by hand, with only the name of the penitent and amount in question requiring variation. Gutenberg realized he could print multiple indulgences at once. He printed forms wherein clerics could simply write the name of the penitent and collect the fee. The result was mass-produced indulgences at a fraction of the cost. He printed thousands of them. He wouldn't print his Bible for another 3 years. Despite common knowledge to the contrary, Gutenberg's contribution wasn't really invention of the press or even the invention of movable type. Evidence suggests a similar, though nascent, concept existed in China as early as the 11th century, and the Jikji, a ritualistic text, was printed using metal type in Korea in 1377. But Gutenberg, a goldsmith, formulated a reliable method for mass production, a durable alloy of lead, tin, and antimony, and the molds by which letters could be set to create a standardized matrix configurable within an overarching frame. The alloy was utile, yielding at low temperature, but solid when cooled. The punches produced were durable, able to impress fine detail. The sharp lines were more definite than hand-carved wood blocks, enabling high-volume reproduction, but also ligatures, character variation, abbreviations, and contractions, all set in uniformity aligned on the page. In effect, the font was born. Textura bastarda, black letter, letterpress, filled out the page in imitation of scribal writ. The world would never be the same. Austria, Italy, France, the Netherlands all became hotbeds of printing. Innovations in the press evolved new lettering, Nicholas Jensen's old-style Venetian, a Roman type with rounded letters, Vindelen, von Speyer's Roman text, the italic, invented by Francesco Grifo in 1500, chiefly to save space on each page, were mostly continental forms. Despite a foothold of the industry in England, William Caxton had brought the press to England in 1476. Strict regulation by the crown in fear of disseminating heresy or sedition meant type was generally imported from the Netherlands. The English press was policed and restricted. For example, there were only 5 printers in London in 1500, all of which were foreign-owned and operated. Over the next centuries, though, things began to change. King Richard III and King Henry VII introduced policies to incentivize the press, lessening restrictions. Then, by the middle of the 17th century, the Bishop of Oxford, John Fell, assembled a collection of types for the Oxford University Press, now called the Fell Types. In 1603, the Stationers incorporated a joint publishing company, consolidating their monopoly over almanacs, books of common prayer, and other bestsellers of the day. It was about this time that stationer Robert Barker purchased exclusive rights to print the King James Bible, paying around £3,500, about 1.3 million present value, for the manuscripts in 1610. Barker had succeeded to the title Royal Printer in 1600 by virtue of his father, Christopher, a stationer, who had acquired the monopoly in 1578 under Queen Elizabeth I. Robert printed the first edition of the King James Bible in 1611, but in 1631, when working on a subsequent print run, 2 errors in setting the type cost Barker dearly. Ultimately, they ruined him. The first was an omission of the negative in the 7th commandment in Exodus 20. Instead of counseling monogamy, the Bible as printed instructed its readers, quote, "Thou shalt commit adultery." Oops. The second purported error, though no copies of the Bible with this error survive, was allegedly a misprint of Deuteronomy 5, where the verse, "Behold, the Lord our God hath showed us his glory and greatness," was rendered, "Behold, the Lord our God hath showed us his glory and his great," ass. Certainly, an error likely to rankle a pious age. In short order, as word spread, Barker and his partner Martin Lucas were called before the High Commission, a sort of special court founded in 1558 by Henry VIII to replace the ecclesiastical courts of the Catholic Church, empowered in equity to convene matters concerning religious conformity as well as to settle other questions not suited to the common law jurisdictions of the Court of the Common Pleas or the Court of King's Bench. After all, what actual crime had Barker and Lewis committed? The High Commission was empowered with wide discretion. It wasn't a court to be trifled with. It had inherited the powers of the Inquisition to issue letters of attachment and compel appearance as well as pursue inquiry at the judge's own volition. In other words, without a plaintiff, under the curious doctrine wrought by the Church of ex officio mero, essentially conferring standing by the power of the office, whereby a defendant could be compelled without an injured party to take an oath de veritate decenda, to speak the truth, thereby exposing their own silence to perjury. The court was heavily criticized even by its members and by legal scholar Edward Coke. It was disbanded by the Act of Parliament in 1641. Still, Barker and Lewis were forced to plead their innocence. It had been simple negligence. They said, wringing their hands, it was not willful. Sabotage by a rival was suggested, but there were additional problems. The court said chiefly the inferiority of the paper and sloppy type versus foreign Bibles printed on better paper with stronger impressions, which sold for 18 pence less than the English versions. Earlier that year, Barker had already seized around 60 of the unlawful imports in Bristol, which curiously he sold as his own. The court fined them both £300, about $75,000 in modern currency. The court held that their monopoly required them to maintain standards for which the fine was proper incentive. There is cause begun against Mr. Barker for false printing of the Bible in diverse places of it, in the edition of 1631, in the 20th of Exodus, thou shalt commit adultery, and in the 5th of Deuteronomy, the Lord hath showed us his glory and his great ass, and for divers other faults, and that they had printed it in very bad paper. And the Bishop of London showed that this would undo the trade, and was a most dishonorable thing, that they of the Church of Rome are so careful that no a word or letter is to be found amiss in their Lady's Psalter, and other superstitious books, and that we should not be so careful in printing the sacred scriptures is unacceptable, and that they in Holland, at Amsterdam, had got up an English press, and had printed the Bible in better paper, and with a better letter, and can undersell us in a Bible. Mr. Barker and his partners endeavored in part to excuse themselves, and had advocates to speak for them, and were willing to submit to penalty, and promised to amend their faults. But the court would not remit their offense, but the cause was ordered to go on. Considering his position, Barker probably got off easy. The problem was, Barker had already invested around £3,000 of his own money, over $1 million in today's currency, into the production. He was over-leveraged. He was ordered to recall and correct all the Bibles he could find, at his own expense. This was largely accomplished, but the undertaking bankrupted him. It is not known if he ever paid his £300 fine. By 1635, he had mortgaged his interest in the press of the royal printer to pay off his debts. A decade later, in 1645, he died in debtor's prison. It is due to these unfortunate events, no doubt, that the original manuscript of the King James Bible has never been found. Barker may have hidden it somewhere in the village of Datchet, near Windsor, where his father had brought an estate back in 1583. Now you can see images of this Bible and what the printing press likely looked like in some of the artist renditions of 17th century print shops. You can see the Exodus 20 in Robert Barker's 1631 Sinner's Bible. It is of course called the Sinner's Bible because it is telling you to do adultery rather than to avoid it. And images of the actual Bible are there in the magazine as well on page 19, which you can view digitally. They've got a nice page there up for issue.com, which hosts the magazine. So there you have it, how one little print error can invalidate and cost someone everything. Now, of course, in today's rapid-fire world of print media, we have the option to publish and then go back and fix it almost immediately, but sometimes the damage is done, and in this case, that certainly was the case. How many of you have gone back and fixed a social media post with the edit button, right? Now imagine the inability to do this and to sort of live with that as the world is maybe perhaps burning around you, especially if this is your livelihood. Pretty crazy. And some neat history. So I want to thank Brother Ben Williams for putting this together, putting it in the Knight Templar magazine, and in general for putting together such a wonderful publication. If you don't get this magazine, you're not a Knight Templar, that's okay. You can head on over to the link, which we have in the show notes, where you can read the issues as they come out. But again, thanks to the Knight Templar magazine and Brother Ben Williams. I would love to tell you guys that I am working on something very special right now, a couple of things actually. One of them has been sort of on the back burner for a long time, but we are getting things all set up there. It is a book. A book, yes, we're doing a wonderful new rendition with annotations and whatnot, and the book is very special to myself and in particular my worshipful master of the lodge that I'm in. We'll be working on that over the next several months and looking at a release perhaps sometime around December, so it might make a good Christmas gift. But if you like books, then consider some of the books that we've done already. Max Heindel's Ancient and Modern Initiation, a special edition we put out. The Master's Word, which is annotated by myself and Brother John Ruark, along with additional context. If you want to learn how to charter a lodge the no-nonsense way, well, you can pick up the book and manual on that, How to Charter a Lodge, a no-nonsense, unsanctioned guide, and that can come to you. And it is essentially the blueprint for Space Novum Lodge 1183 here in Illinois, the premier education lodge in the state. We've also got the How to Charter a Lodge, an original book by myself and Brother John Ruark, called It's Business Time, Adapting a Corporate Path for Freemasonry. All those books are available on the shop, autographed. They'll come direct from me to you. And if you don't care if they're autographed or not, you just want to grab it through Amazon, you can do that too. Links to all that will be in the shop on the website, wzypodcast.com. Click on the shop. Now, one more time before we blast out of here, I need to thank our contributors, fellows, producers, and legacy partners one more time for all that you have done to keep this show going since 2011. I want to thank you all. If you're out there and you're curious on how you can help support the show, just head on over to the website and explore. We've got all kinds of great things, and if Patreon or PayPal isn't for you, maybe you want to get a little something that helps support the show, you can definitely check out the shop, whether those are books, pins, a tarot card reading, whatever you'd like. We have it all there. Whatever you're interested in, we have it there on the site, and hopefully we've got something for you. And with that, I want to thank you all so much for being with us this week, and until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
WCY Media.
Well, you guys beat me as not the